I still remember every detail of that moment because it's burned into my memory forever. There I was, standing at the altar of St. Michael's Cathedral, adjusting my platinum cufflinks one last time. The same cufflinks my father wore at his wedding 40 years ago. My custom Armani tuxedo fit perfectly, and I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. 150 guests filled the pews behind me, including family who'd flown in from Seattle and Chicago. The flowers alone cost me $12,000, but Sarah had insisted on white orchids because they were elegant and timeless. The organ music started, and I turned to watch my future wife walk down the aisle. Sarah looked absolutely stunning in her custom Vera Wang dress, the one we'd spent 3 months selecting in New York. $8,000, not including the alterations, but she'd looked so happy trying it on that I didn't hesitate to pull out my black card. Her veil trailed behind her like something from a fairy tale, and the diamond tiara I'd surprised her with caught the light streaming through the stained glass windows. But something was wrong. Instead of looking at me with the radiant smile I'd seen during our rehearsal dinner, Sarah kept glancing toward the back of the church. Her steps slowed as she reached the halfway point, and I noticed her father Tom looking confused beside her. That's when she stopped completely, about 20 feet from the altar, right in front of my business partner Rebecca and my college friends. The organ music continued for a few more notes before trailing off awkwardly. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah reached into her bouquet and pulled out her phone. Her phone. At our wedding ceremony, I watched in disbelief as she actually looked at the screen, then looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not regret, not nervousness, but something that looked almost like pity. "I can't do this, Liam," she announced, her voice carrying clearly through the cathedral's acoustics. Every guest heard every word. "I've been lying to myself and to you. Marcus is here," and seeing him made me realize what real love feels like. I followed her gaze to the back of the church, where Marcus Chen stood near the entrance in a rental tuxedo that was clearly too big for him. Marcus, her childhood friend who bartended at that dive bar downtown. Marcus, who she'd claimed was just a friend, whenever I asked why she was texting him so late at night. The gasps from our guests started as murmurs, but grew louder. I heard my mother Margaret whisper, "Oh my God," from the front row. Sarah's bridesmaids, standing behind me in their lavender dresses, looked like they'd seen a ghost. My brother David, who was supposed to be our wedding photographer, stood frozen with his camera halfway to his face. But Sarah wasn't finished. She looked directly into my eyes and said the words that would replay in my head for months afterward. "You'll never be enough for me, Liam. You're just safe, and safe isn't what I want anymore. I deserve passion, not a portfolio." The cathedral erupted. Guests were standing, pointing, whispering frantically. Someone's aunt started crying. Tom looked like he wanted to disappear into the marble floor, but in that moment of complete chaos, something strange happened to me. Instead of anger or heartbreak, I felt this incredible clarity wash over me, like puzzle pieces clicking into place. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the sealed envelope I'd prepared 3 days earlier. Call it intuition, call it financial advisor paranoia, but something had been nagging at me all week. I walked the few steps to Sarah, handed her the envelope and said in a voice steady enough that the entire church could hear, "Open this tomorrow morning, Sarah, but check your bank account first." Then I turned to Father Mackenzie, shook his hand, and said, "Thank you for your time, Father." I faced our guests, took a deep breath and announced, "The reception will continue as planned downstairs. Dinner is served and the bar is open. Please everyone eat and celebrate. It's all paid for." Sarah stood there clutching my envelope, her $8,000 dress suddenly looking like a costume. Marcus shuffled forward awkwardly, and I realized this was the moment my real life was about to begin. What happened next probably looked insane to anyone watching, but it felt like the most natural thing in the world. While Sarah and Marcus whispered frantically near the altar, I walked down to where my elderly great-aunt Helen was sitting. She'd flown in from Phoenix specifically for this wedding, despite her arthritis making travel painful. "Aunt Helen," I said, taking her weathered hand in mine, "I'm so sorry you had to witness this. But I want you to know how much it means to me that you came all this way." She squeezed my hand and whispered, "That girl never deserved you, sweetheart. Your Uncle Robert and I could see it from day one." I moved through the cathedral like I was hosting a normal dinner party. I found Sarah's cousin, Jessica, who'd driven 12 hours from Denver with her 3 kids, and personally apologized for the drama. I shook hands with my college roommate, Mike, who'd taken 2 days off work to be here. Food's still good downstairs, I told him with what I hoped looked like a genuine smile. "Open bar too. Please don't let this ruin your weekend." My brother David kept following me with his camera, and I could see the concern in his eyes behind the lens. He'd always been the artistic one, and I knew he was documenting something he sensed was significant. Later, when I looked at those photos, I'd see what he captured, my hollow eyes contradicting my composed smile, my hands slightly trembling as I straightened my tie, the way my jaw was clenched so tight you could see the muscle working. But in the moment, all I could think about were the numbers. The numbers always made sense, even when nothing else did. $43,000 for the engagement ring, not $40,000 like I'd told myself to make it sound more reasonable. I'd worked every Saturday for 6 months to afford that ring, skipping golf with clients, missing my nephew's birthday party, declining invitations to David's art gallery openings. $87,000 for the wedding. I'd kept meticulous spreadsheets, tracking every deposit, every vendor payment, every upgrade Sarah had requested. The flowers, the photographer, the string quartet, the premium open bar, the extra course she'd insisted on adding just 2 weeks ago. I'd liquidated my Amazon stock to cover the final payments, telling myself it was an investment in our future. The house was the worst part to think about. Sarah had fallen in love with that colonial in Westchester, the one with the chef's kitchen and the walk-in closet. I'd put down 20%, $160,000, because she'd said she couldn't imagine starting our marriage anywhere else. The mortgage papers were sitting on my desk at home, both our names on the deed, ready to be filed after the honeymoon. 3 years of working 70-hour weeks while Sarah complained that I was never available for dinner dates. 3 years of saving every bonus, every commission check, while she browsed Nordstrom online and added items to her wish list. 3 years of saying no to vacations with my friends because we were saving for the wedding and the house. And through it all, she'd seemed slightly disappointed. Nothing was ever quite enough, quite right, quite what she'd envisioned. The ring could have been bigger, the wedding venue more prestigious, the honeymoon more exotic. I'd attributed it to perfectionism, to wanting our special day to be flawless. Now I realized she wasn't disappointed in the things, she was disappointed in me. As I watched her gather her dress and walk toward the exit with Marcus, something fundamental shifted inside me. Not rage, not heartbreak, but something colder and more useful. Clarity. For the first time in 3 years, I could see the situation exactly as it was. I wasn't losing the love of my life. I was discovering that the love of my life had never existed at all. The woman in the $8,000 dress walking away from me was a stranger who'd been playing a role for 3 years, and the man in the custom tuxedo who'd been working himself to death, trying to make her happy, was about to remember who he used to be. As I drove home from the cathedral that night, still in my tuxedo, my mind kept drifting back to moments that should have been warning signs. The kind of moments that seem innocent when you're in love but feel sinister when you replay them with clear eyes. It started about 8 months ago when Sarah suddenly became fascinated with my finances. Not in a gold digger way, or so I thought, but in what seemed like a mature, future planning way. She'd ask thoughtful questions about my investment portfolio during dinner, suggesting we should be completely transparent about money before we get married. She even bought a book about financial planning for couples and left it on my nightstand with little sticky notes marking important chapters. "Liam, I think we should combine our accounts," she'd said one evening while we were reviewing wedding vendors. "My financial advisor says couples who merge their finances early have stronger marriages. It shows trust." She was sitting cross-legged on my couch, her laptop open to a spreadsheet she'd made of our wedding expenses, looking so organized and responsible. How could I say no to that? The joint account started small. Sarah suggested we each contribute to wedding expenses, proportionally based on our incomes. Since I made considerably more as a financial advisor than she did in marketing, I was contributing about 70%. Fair enough, I thought. But then the contributions became requests, became assumptions. Can you transfer another $5,000 to our wedding account? I found the perfect photographer, but they need a deposit by Friday. Those late-night texting sessions with Marcus began around the same time, but Sarah had a perfectly reasonable explanation. He's going through a rough patch, she'd say, typing away while we watched Netflix. His band broke up, and he's really struggling. I'm just trying to be a good friend. When I suggested maybe she was spending too much emotional energy on his problems, she'd get defensive. I've known Marcus since we were kids. I can't just abandon him because I'm getting married. The engagement party was where everything should have clicked for me. Sarah insisted Marcus be invited, despite the fact that I'd never really spent time with him and found him pretentious and immature. He showed up wearing ripped jeans and a vintage band t-shirt to an event where everyone else was dressed up, but Sarah spent half the night making sure he felt included. She'd drag him into conversations, explain inside jokes from their childhood, and laugh a little too loudly at his sarcastic comments about bourgeois celebrations. But the real red flag was the prenup conversation. When my attorney suggested we draft one, given my assets, Sarah's reaction was immediate and emotional. "You don't trust me," she'd cried, tears streaming down her face. "Planning for divorce before we're even married is like planning for failure. If you loved me, you'd know I'm not after your money." She made it sound so romantic, so pure. I felt like a cynical fool for even bringing it up. 3 weeks before the wedding, Sarah suggested we update all our beneficiaries and emergency contact. "I want to make sure if anything happens to either of us, we're taken care of," she said, spreading forms across my kitchen table. She'd already filled out her portion, listing me as the primary beneficiary on her modest 401k and life insurance policy. It seemed sweet, responsible even. So I signed the papers making her a joint owner on my investment accounts and updating my life insurance to include her. Looking back, the most telling moment was when Sarah insisted on that expensive honeymoon in Bora Bora. We'd originally planned something more modest, maybe Italy or even a nice resort in Hawaii, but Sarah had seen photos on Instagram and decided we deserved to celebrate properly. When I hesitated at the $15,000 price tag, she'd gotten quiet and said, "I just want to start our marriage feeling like we're not settling for less than we dream about." The signs were all there, painted in dollar signs and late-night text messages and defensive explanation. But love, or what I thought was love, has a way of turning red flags into romantic gestures and calculated moves into caring concern. The next morning, I woke up at 5 a.m. in my childhood bedroom at my mother's house, still wearing yesterday's dress shirt and pants. The events at the cathedral felt like a nightmare until I saw my crumpled tuxedo jacket on the floor and remembered it was all real. My first instinct was to check our joint accounts for damage control, but what I discovered was so much worse than unauthorized shopping sprees. I grabbed my laptop and logged into our primary joint checking account, expecting to see maybe a few $1,000s in stress purchases. Instead, I found systematic withdrawals dating back 3 months. 500 here, 800 there, always amounts small enough to avoid triggering alerts, but large enough to add up to over $12,000. The memo lines were clever: wedding flowers deposit, catering adjustment, dress alterations. But I had the real receipts, and these charges didn't match any legitimate wedding expenses. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The account activity showed she'd been accessing it from locations I'd never been to. Coffee shops in Brooklyn, restaurants in Queens, even a hotel in Manhattan from 2 weeks ago when she'd told me she was having a girls' night with her sister. I called the bank's fraud department, and they provided me with detailed location data for every transaction. The pattern was unmistakable. Sarah had been living a completely separate life on my dime, but the real smoking gun was hidden in her email account. We'd shared passwords for everything as a sign of trust, or so she'd convinced me. When I logged into her Gmail, looking for vendor confirmations, I found a folder labeled Wedding Planning that contained much more than flower arrangement. The first email I opened was from Marcus, dated 6 months ago. "Babe, I can't wait much longer. Watching you play house with that guy is killing me. "You sure this plan is going to work?" Sarah's response was clinical in its calculation. "Trust me, once we're married and I have legal access to everything, we can be together properly. He's too trusting to get a prenup, and his portfolio is worth $2.3 million. Even a short marriage would set us up for life." My hands were shaking as I scrolled through months of correspondence. They'd researched divorce laws in New York, calculated potential alimony payments, and even discussed how to maximize settlement amounts by establishing expensive lifestyle patterns during the marriage. Marcus had sent her screenshots of Zillow listings for condos they could afford once the divorce comes through. The most damning evidence was a conversation from 3 days before our wedding. Sarah had written, "Liam signed all the beneficiary updates. If something happened to him on our honeymoon, I'd inherit everything outright. But divorce is safer and more reliable. Plus, this way I don't have to pretend to grieve." Marcus's response was a crying, laughing emoji and, "You're diabolical. I love it." There were photos I'd never seen, selfies of them together in what looked like the secret apartment she'd been renting with my money, images of them in bed together, Marcus wearing a watch I'd thought I'd misplaced, Sarah in lingerie I'd bought her for our anniversary. The timestamps showed these photos were taken while I was working late, earning the money that was funding their affair. The final piece of evidence was a Google document titled "Exit Strategy" that laid out their post-wedding timeline. Sarah planned to be unhappy for 6 months to establish grounds for irreconcilable differences, then file for divorce citing emotional neglect due to my work schedule. They'd calculated that she could claim spousal support, half our joint assets, and potentially alimony based on the lifestyle I'd provided during our engagement. At the bottom of the document, Marcus had added a comment. "What if he fights it?" Sarah's response was chilling. "He won't. He's too proud and too soft. He'll just want it over with quietly. Men like Liam don't make scenes." As I sat there reading their casual discussion of destroying my life, I realized Sarah was wrong about one thing. I wouldn't make a scene, but I also wouldn't be the easy target they'd planned for. The envelope I'd given her yesterday contained just a small preview of what I'd discovered. The real evidence was safely backed up in multiple locations, and my attorney was expecting a very interesting phone call Monday morning. By 7 a.m. that Sunday morning, I was sitting in my home office with 3 monitors displaying everything I needed: bank statements, email screenshots, legal research, and my contact list. Years of managing high net worth clients had taught me that emotional decisions lead to expensive mistakes. This required precision, not passion. My first call was to Rebecca Walsh, my business partner and the most methodical person I knew. She answered on the second ring, her voice immediately alert despite the early hour. "Liam, I saw what happened yesterday. Are you okay?" "Rebecca, I need your help, and I need you to think like a forensic accountant, not a friend." I walked her through everything I'd discovered, sending screenshots as we talked. There was silence on her end for several minutes as she reviewed the evidence. "Jesus, Liam, this isn't just infidelity. This is fraud, possibly wire fraud given the interstate transactions. How do you want to handle this?" "Methodically," I said. "First, I need to protect what's left." I called my bank's priority customer service line and explained that I needed to freeze all joint accounts due to suspected fraudulent activity. Within 20 minutes, every account Sarah had access to was locked pending investigation. I provided them with the evidence of unauthorized transactions and location data that proved she'd been accessing funds without my knowledge for purchases unrelated to our shared expenses. Next, I contacted my investment firm. Sarah was listed as a beneficiary, an emergency contact, on accounts worth over $2 million. "I need to remove someone from all my accounts immediately," I told my advisor. "I'm sending you documentation of attempted financial fraud." The paperwork would take a few days, but they immediately flagged the accounts to prevent any unauthorized access. The credit cards were easier. I called each company, reported the cards as compromised due to fraud, and had them cancel Sarah's authorized user access. Those charges for her secret apartment, the expensive dinners with Marcus, the designer clothes she'd bought while planning to leave me, all of it was now her responsibility. Then I did something that felt like the old me was dying and someone new was being born. I changed every password Sarah had ever known: banking, email, Netflix, Amazon, even my gym membership. I activated two-factor authentication on everything and changed all my security questions to answers she couldn't possibly know. The note I'd given Sarah yesterday was deliberately simple, but now I was preparing the real response. I spent 3 hours drafting a detailed letter to her, copying her father Tom and her sister Jennifer. It wasn't angry or emotional, just factual. I attached bank statements showing the unauthorized withdrawals, screenshots of her emails with Marcus, discussing their plan, and a clear breakdown of every dollar she'd taken under false pretense. Sarah, the letter began, yesterday's events at our wedding were surprising, but this morning's discoveries were not. The attached evidence shows a pattern of financial fraud and intentional deception, dating back 8 months. All joint accounts have been frozen pending investigation. The $23,008 unauthorized charges you've accumulated are now your sole responsibility. Any wedding-related contracts signed in your name remain your obligation. I kept the tone clinical, professional. No accusations of betrayal or emotional manipulation, just facts and figures. The kind of language that would hold up in court if necessary. But the most important call was to my attorney, James Morrison, who specialized in high-asset divorces and fraud cases. Jim, I need to see you first thing Monday morning. Bring your fraud specialist and someone who understands New York divorce law. I'm sending you evidence of what might be the most well-documented case of matrimonial fraud you've ever seen. How bad is it, Lee? Bad enough that by the time we're done she'll wish yesterday's humiliation was the worst thing that happened to her. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger is hot and impulsive and leads to mistakes. What I felt was cold and methodical and utterly focused. Sarah had spent months planning to destroy my life systematically. Now it was my turn to return the favor, except I had something she didn't: actual evidence, legal standing, and the patience to do it right. The first call came at 6:47 a.m. Monday morning. I was already at my desk, coffee in hand, reviewing documents with Rebecca, when my phone started buzzing. Sarah's name flashed on the screen, but I let it go to voicemail. Then she called again, and again. By the time she'd called 7 times in 10 minutes, I decided to answer. Liam, what the hell did you do? Her voice was panicked, breathless. I can't access any of our accounts. The bank said they're frozen for fraud investigation. This is insane. Good morning, Sarah, I said calmly, putting her on speaker so Rebecca could hear. I assume you tried to access the joint checking account this morning? Of course I did. We have bills to pay. The hotel suite for last night cost $4,200, and my card was declined. I'm standing in the lobby wearing yesterday's wedding dress because Marcus doesn't have money for another night, and everyone is staring at me. I almost felt sorry for her until I remembered the emails about my inheritance. Sarah, I sent you a detailed letter this morning explaining everything. I suggest you read it carefully. Also, you might want to call that lawyer you were researching divorce strategies with. The silence that followed told me she understood exactly what I meant. When she spoke again, her voice had changed from panic to something approaching terror. You read my emails. I read our shared email account, yes. Fascinating correspondence you've been having with Marcus. Particularly the discussion about my net worth and your timeline for maximizing a divorce settlement. Liam, I can explain all of that. We never meant for you to get hurt. It just happened naturally between Marcus and me, and we were scared to tell you. Rebecca rolled her eyes and made a gagging gesture. The woman was still lying even with overwhelming evidence against her. Sarah, at this point my attorney is handling all communication. James Morrison from Morrison, Klein & Associates. You'll be hearing from him shortly. I'd suggest getting your own legal representation. The second wave of calls started around noon. But these weren't from Sarah. Tom Mitchell, her father, called. Liam, I just got your letter, and I'm mortified. I had no idea Sarah was capable of this. Is there anything I can do to make this right? Tom, I appreciate that, but this is between Sarah and me now. I just wanted you to know the truth before you heard her version. Sarah's sister Jennifer called an hour later, crying. Liam, I'm so sorry. She asked me to lie about where she was on so many nights. I thought she was just having cold feet about the wedding. I never imagined she was planning this with Mark, but the call that really drove home how badly Sarah had miscalculated came from Marcus himself at 3:15 p.m. He sounded desperate. Dude, look, I know you're pissed, but Sarah is falling apart. She's been crying for hours and she can't pay for anything. The hotel is threatening to call the police because we can't pay the bill, and her credit cards are maxed out. Can't you just unfreeze one account so she can get home? Marcus, I said, my voice deadly calm. Let me explain something to you. Sarah stole almost $24,000 from me over the past 3 months to fund the apartment where you two were playing house. She planned to marry me, divorce me within a year, and take half my assets so you two could live comfortably. This isn't a lover's quarrel, it's fraud. So no, I won't be unfreezing anything to help either of you. But she loves me, man. She only stayed with you for security. You can't punish her for following her heart. I hung up on him. The real entertainment started Tuesday morning when Sarah showed up at my office building. Security called to ask if I wanted to see her, and I said absolutely not. Through the lobby cameras, I watched her pace back and forth for 2 hours, making frantic phone calls. She looked nothing like the composed woman who'd walked down the aisle 3 days earlier. Her hair was unwashed. She was wearing the same clothes from yesterday, and she kept wiping her eyes with tissues. Rebecca, who was enjoying this more than she should have, provided commentary. She's calling someone again. Third call in 10 minutes. Oh, now she's sitting on the floor. Class. Wednesday brought the legal pressure Sarah wasn't prepared for. My attorney James had filed preliminary fraud charges, and the district attorney's office was now involved. Sarah's hastily hired lawyer called James to discuss a reasonable settlement to avoid criminal prosecution. James called me with an update. Her attorney is in full panic mode. Apparently, Sarah thought this would be handled quietly in family court. She had no idea that systematic financial fraud could become a criminal matter. They're requesting a meeting. What do you think? I think she's about to learn that stealing $24,000 while planning to defraud someone of millions isn't the romantic adventure she thought it would be. By Thursday, Marcus had abandoned ship completely. Sarah's Facebook relationship status changed from "it's complicated" back to "single." And mutual friends told me he'd moved back in with his parents in New Jersey. The fairy tale romance that was supposed to be funded by my divorce settlement had crumbled under the weight of legal bills and frozen assets. Friday morning brought the most satisfying call of all. Sarah sobbing, begging me to work this out privately, because her lawyer had explained that criminal fraud charges could result in actual jail time. Liam, please, I made a terrible mistake. I was confused and scared about the wedding. Marcus manipulated me into this whole I never meant to hurt you. I listened to her entire breakdown without saying a word. When she finally finished, I gave her the same response I'd given Marcus. Sarah, my attorney is handling all communication now. And I hung up. The woman who'd stood at the altar and told me I'd never be enough was discovering exactly how much I'd actually been worth to her life. 6 months after the wedding that never was, I was sitting in first class on an Aer Lingus flight to Dublin with my mother Margaret, watching her press her face to the window like a child as the Irish coastline came into view. She'd been talking about visiting Ireland since my father died 8 years ago. But there was never time, never enough money saved up, always something else taking priority. The $87,000 I'd recovered from wedding vendors after the fraud investigation had given me a different perspective on what really mattered. Liam, I can't believe we're really doing this, she whispered, squeezing my hand. Your father would have loved this trip. As we toured the cliffs of Moher and she told me stories about our Irish ancestors, I realized this was the first time in years I'd seen my mother truly happy. Not polite happy, not making the best of it happy, but genuinely radiant. During the 3 years I'd been working myself to death for Sarah's approval, I'd been too busy to notice that my mother was lonely, that she'd been quietly grieving, not just my father, but the son who'd become too important to spend time with family. The business transformation happened naturally. Word spreads fast in the financial services world, and apparently my handling of the Sarah situation had impressed some people. Rebecca told me that clients were specifically requesting to work with the advisor who kept his cool during that wedding disaster. What they really respected wasn't my composure, but my systematic approach to protecting assets under extreme emotional stress. You proved you can think clearly in crisis, said Richard Hartwell, a hedge fund manager who became one of our biggest clients. If you can handle your personal finances getting attacked by someone you trusted completely, I know you can handle my portfolio during market volatility. Our client base grew by 40% in 6 months. Rebecca and I hired 2 additional advisors and moved to a bigger office space in Midtown. The Sarah drama, as painful as it had been, had accidentally become the best advertisement for our crisis management skills that money couldn't buy. But the real change was Rebecca. We'd always worked well together, but during those intense weeks of documenting Sarah's fraud and rebuilding my financial security, something shifted between us. Late nights at the office turned into dinners that weren't quite business meetings. Professional conversations started, including personal ones. Rebecca had been there for the worst moment of my life, but she'd also been there for the recovery, and I started seeing her not just as my business partner, but as someone who genuinely understood who I was underneath all the financial planning and crisis management. "You know," she said one evening as we reviewed quarterly reports, "I always thought Sarah was wrong for you, but I never imagined she was that wrong." "What do you mean?" "She saw your success but not your character. She wanted the portfolio but not the person who built it. I've watched you work for 5 years, Liam. You're not just good with money, you're good to people." Sarah never appreciated that. Rebecca wasn't looking for a rescue or a provider. She had her own successful career, her own investments, her own life goal. When we started dating, it felt like a partnership between equals rather than someone auditioning for the role of Liam's wife. She liked Thai food and bad movies and hiking on weekends. She laughed at my terrible jokes and called me out when I was being too analytical about everything. Most importantly, she never once asked about my bank account balance or suggested we combine our finances. The house purchase was the clearest sign of how much my life had changed. Instead of the pretentious colonial in Westchester that Sarah had demanded, I bought a smaller craftsman-style home in a quiet neighborhood in Connecticut. It had a workshop in the basement where I could finally pursue the woodworking hobby I'd abandoned during my workaholic years, a garden where my mother could plant vegetables when she visited, and a home office where Rebecca and I could work remotely when we wanted to escape the city chaos. 3 months ago, I started volunteering at a financial literacy center in the Bronx, teaching people how to avoid predatory lending and recognize financial manipulation in relationships. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was now an expert on spotting financial red flags in romantic partnerships, but helping people protect themselves from what I'd experienced gave me a sense of purpose that earning high commissions never had. My brother David had the wedding photos professionally printed and bound into a book he titled Grace Under 5. Looking through those images now, I could see something I'd missed in the moment. The last pictures showed me not as a victim of betrayal, but as someone discovering his own strength. The man in that custom tuxedo, calmly thanking the priest and ensuring the guests were taken care of, wasn't the same person who'd spent 3 years trying to earn someone's love through his bank account. That man had finally learned the difference between being wanted and being valued, between being someone's safety net and being someone's partner. And for the first time in years, he was exactly where he belonged. 18 months after the wedding that never happened, I was sitting in my home workshop, carefully applying the final coat of stain to a mahogany bookshelf I'd been crafting for weeks. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, illuminating particles of sawdust dancing in the air. This workshop had become my sanctuary, a place where I could create something beautiful with my hands instead of just moving numbers around on computer screens all day. The sound of a car engine made me look up from my work. Through the window, I saw a beat-up Honda Civic pulling into my driveway, and my heart sank when I recognized the driver stepping out. Sarah moved slowly, looking nothing like the confident woman who'd once demanded only the finest of everything. She'd lost considerable weight. Her once perfect blonde hair was now shorter and clearly cut at a budget salon. The designer clothes were completely gone, replaced by a worn Target sweater and jeans that had clearly seen better days. I watched her hesitate by her car for a long moment, checking her reflection in the window and nervously smoothing down her hair. The entitled confidence that used to radiate from her had completely vanished. She looked fragile, defeated, like someone who'd been knocked down hard by life and was still learning how to stand again. I set down my brush and walked to the front door, opening it before she could knock. We stood there in awkward silence for what felt like an eternity. Up close, I could see the stress lines around her eyes, The way her hands trembled slightly as she clutched a small purse that was obviously a knockoff of the designer bag she used to carry without thinking twice about the cost. "Liam, I know I have absolutely no right to be here," she began, her voice much smaller and more hesitant than I remembered. But I needed to apologize properly, face to face, like adults should handle these things. "Okay," I said simply, leaning against the doorframe but making no move to invite her inside. "Marcus left me 3 months after what should have been our wedding day," she continued, the words spilling out like she'd rehearsed them during the entire drive here. "Turns out he was only interested in the financial security he thought I'd bring to the relationship, not me as a person. When he finally realized there was no money coming, no big divorce settlement, no easy life funded by your hard work, he just disappeared, packed his stuff one night and moved back in with his parents in New Jersey without even saying goodbye." She paused, looking down at her hands with shame. Her nails, once perfectly manicured with expensive gel polish that cost more than most people spend on groceries, were now short and unpolished with small cuts and burns from restaurant work. The fraud charges ended up costing me $14,000 in legal fees, money I didn't have and couldn't borrow because my credit was completely destroyed. I had to declare bankruptcy last month. Lost my marketing job when the story spread around the industry. Nobody wants to hire someone with a fraud investigation on their record. Now I'm working double shifts at an all-night diner in Queens. Night shifts mostly, serving coffee to truckers and cab drivers at 3 in the morning. Counting tips in crumpled dollar bills. Despite everything she'd put me through, everything she'd tried to steal from me, I felt a flicker of genuine sympathy. Not for the situation she'd created for herself, but for the person who'd been so completely lost that she thought destroying someone else's life was her only path to happiness. "I keep thinking about what I threw away," she continued, her voice breaking slightly with emotion. "Not just the money, though the financial insecurity terrifies me every single day. But the way you treated everyone at that wedding with such incredible grace, even after what I did to you in front of all those people. I've worked with dozens of people since then, and I've never met anyone else with that kind of quiet strength." "Sarah," I said gently, choosing my words carefully, "I genuinely appreciate you coming here, and I can see this took real courage. But I need you to understand something important. I'm not angry with you anymore. Haven't been for many months. What you did, as devastating as it was at the time, forced me to examine what I really wanted from life. And it turned out it wasn't what I thought I wanted." She looked confused, tilting her head slightly, so I continued. "I spent 3 years working myself to death, sacrificing everything that made me who I was, trying to be enough for someone who was never going to be satisfied. You wanted excitement, passion, drama, someone to rescue you from what felt like ordinary life. I was offering partnership, stability, someone to build a real, sustainable life with. Neither approach is wrong, but we wanted fundamentally different things." I gestured toward my workshop behind me, where half-finished projects lined the walls like promises of creativity and fulfillment. "I haven't worked a single weekend in 10 months. I cook dinner at home instead of ordering expensive takeout. I read novels for pleasure instead of just financial reports. I'm learning to play guitar, badly but enthusiastically. I planted a vegetable garden last spring. I remember what I used to enjoy before I got completely obsessed with earning enough money to make someone else happy. Are you happy now?" she asked quietly, genuinely curious. "Yeah, I really am. Rebecca and I are planning a small ceremony next spring. Just family and close friends in my mother's backyard. Simple, authentic, focusing on what actually matters instead of what looks impressive." "I'm glad," she said, and I believed she truly meant it. "You deserve someone who appreciates what you have to offer." After she left, I sat on my front porch for a long time, watching the sunset paint the sky through the oak trees I'd planted last fall. This house felt completely different from the colonial mansion Sarah had demanded we needed. Smaller, quieter, but mine in a way that other place never would have been. Every room reflected my authentic choices, not compromises designed to impress someone else. My phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. "Dinner's ready when you get home. Made your favorite mushroom pasta. Take your time with your project though." Home. When had I started thinking of her apartment as home? Probably around the same time I stopped feeling like I needed to constantly earn my place in someone's life. My mother always told me that still waters run deep, but I'd never understood what she meant until now. I thought strength had to be loud and demonstrative. Love had to be earned through expensive gestures. Success meant working until you forgot what you were working toward. But the strongest response to betrayal isn't revenge or confrontation. Sometimes it's simply removing yourself from the chaos with your dignity intact and building something better in the quiet spaces. Real love doesn't need access to your bank account as proof. Real partnership doesn't require you to lose yourself to make someone else happy. The most powerful lesson isn't about learning to avoid people like Sarah. It's about becoming the kind of person who naturally attracts people like Rebecca. People who see your worth in who you are, not what you can provide. People who choose to stay because they want to build something meaningful together, not because they need you to rescue them. That evening, as I locked up my workshop and walked back toward my truck, I realized Sarah had been absolutely right about one thing at the altar. The old Liam, the one who worked 70-hour weeks and measured his worth in account balances, would never have been enough for her. But more importantly, he wouldn't have been enough for me either. Sometimes the loudest statement you can make is closing the door quietly and walking towards something better. Sometimes the greatest victory is discovering that what you thought you lost was never really yours to begin with. The person I became after that disaster was someone I actually liked, someone I was proud to be, and that realization, more than any revenge I could have taken, was worth everything I'd been through.